If you think it's impossible to hate even more, listen to the following story. At the age of 3, he endured horrific torture by the Russians with a collar around his neck. They left him to die slowly after brutally torturing and killing his mother in front of him. This story of Russian atrocities in Kherson during the occupation has recently surfaced. It's impossible to listen to it without tears. What's happening with the boy now, I'll tell you in a moment. This is TSN.ua News, and I'm your host, Victoria Natyak. Let's move on to the news. The body of a 3-year-old boy was found unconscious with a collar around his neck in the house where he lived with his mother, discovered by a relative. The woman suspects that the occupiers entered this house not by chance. The boy's father has been fighting on the front lines since 2014, and miraculously, the child was saved by the relative. She shared her family's story with journalists for investigative purposes. For their safety, the names and faces of the heroes are hidden. On June 20th, 2022, they came to my daughter-in-law's house. In the morning, I went there and found her murdered, tortured. There was a child nearby, also tortured with a collar around his neck. I removed the collar and tried to resuscitate him. I succeeded and took him to Odessa. The woman was afraid to leave Kherson. At the checkpoint, the Russians could immediately find out and identify the family. Instead, they still found and killed her in her own home. They did not spare the child either. Both were horribly tortured. Neighbors most likely heard screams but were afraid to come out. It seemed like no one heard, even though it was summer, and I think the child was screaming, and the mother was screaming too. The windows were open, even broken. I think the neighbors heard, but they are afraid to testify.
When all this started, she wrote to my brother, her husband. He wrote to me, but there was no communication because the orcs had shut him down, and I could only receive messages after curfew. When I went to the store that had Wi-Fi, it was around 7 in the morning. I received the message and immediately went to them. Within an hour, I was shocked, of course. He was screaming on the other end. The child saw how they killed his mother, heard screams. He was also subjected to repeated torture. The occupiers didn't even care about the child's age. The relative had to witness all the horror twice. They persuaded her to return home to document the atrocities committed by the Russians against her relatives. She was very badly beaten, raped with a smudge on her neck. The child saw it because the child was also tortured. He was very badly beaten. They stubbed out cigarette butts on the child's face, and there was also a smudge on his neck. He's 4.5 now, but then he was 3. When this happened, and when I reported it by phone, I was told to go back to the room, take a deep breath, calm down, take photos and videos for the investigation so that criminal proceedings could be opened for war crimes. It was even too much for me, but I had to go in. I sent them from my phone and then deleted and erased everything on the phone, all the information. I also had her phone where I deleted everything, all the information, and hid all the documents.
The local authorities and the garrison commander pretended to be conducting an investigation and searching for the guilty parties. Representatives of the local government, the chief doctor of the hospital, and the garrison commander arrived. They attempted to conduct some investigation, but their attitude towards the child was unfavorable. They claimed that the child was not developed. An hour ago, they removed a cloth from the child's neck, and he calls the child undeveloped. He waves his hand. The child experienced clinical death, and it should be him. He doesn't speak. He can't because he was beaten. The woman understood that they couldn't stay in the city because they could hunt the child to finish him off. Leaving was also dangerous, but she still dared. As soon as the child moved away from punishment a little, sometimes it is possible to pass through checkpoint, but people are often shot for no reason, just for a look or just because they don't like it or for fun. Along the way, the woman saw bodies, corpses. The journey was further complicated by the fact that she had severe diabetes, and there was no access to insulin in the occupied territory. However, she had to save the child, and she managed to do so. We waited until the marks on the child's face and neck disappeared so that we could not be identified. What did not become a habit within 2 weeks, we tried to hide. I was not allowed to speak. I was not allowed to cry. I couldn't express my grief because it was my personal loss. This boy was dear to me. He was like a son to me, and it was my personal grief. I couldn't afford to grieve because I was holding the child. I knew that if I started grieving, it would be very difficult and dangerous during the trip. And it happened. It was horrible. We were on the road for 3 days, covering 850 kilometers, detouring through checkpoints. There were about 30 of them. I heard a woman shouting at me that I would be shot at the first checkpoint. And I counted the checkpoints as we drove. First, second, third, 17th. We reached the town of Vasilikivka, where we stood in a queue that was 18 kilometers long. There were people who died from illness, and it was very hot. People were just dying, and it created a lot of tension. People were just leaving, and we were leaving secretly. I was taking out the child, a boy who was almost killed. I was taking him out as my own child. We had forged documents, and at one of the checkpoints after Vasilikivka before the gray zone, we were stopped. One soldier said to another, "Let's finish them off." And the other replied, "Nah, I've had enough for today." And the third said, "Nah, let them rejoice at the next checkpoint." I saw the bodies, but I didn't see what happened to them. But I saw the bodies. I saw them indistinctly. They were somewhat distant from me, but I understood that they were civilians, 4 of them. I had been at the wheel for 3 days already. My right leg was paralyzed, so I pressed the pedal with my left. My blood sugar was very high, almost 30, and my blood pressure was 200. I was in critical condition, but I had to drive and control the car. I promised that I would get him there alive, and I did. After the horrors the child had experienced, he was taken care of by doctors in Ukraine, including psychologists. The woman says that the first months after the tragedy were unbearable, but now the boy is better. Specialists continue to work with him, gradually preparing him for first grade. At first, he was uncontrollable, cried heavily, screamed for hours at night. I tried to calm him down. He couldn't eat because he was traumatized. He stopped talking altogether, and now we're trying to teach him to speak again. I think we're making progress little by little. Many specialists are working hard on this. Sometimes I feel discouraged and I think I can't handle it, but then I muster all my strength and can continue. I believe this is a struggle. I'm not fighting against him, but against his condition, to bring him back to a normal level so that the child can go to school in a year and a half. And judging by how he was when I took him and how he is now, it's possible. The woman herself has only recently been able to open up and talk about all this. She says, you have to learn to live with it. You have to learn how to endure this grief. It's something we can't change, and we just have to learn to live with it. I can only talk about it now without despair and without tears. Just half a year ago, I couldn't talk about it without tears at all. I cry when it comes to his mother. He says, "Mommy's not here." Once he pointed to the sky in the evening and said, "Mommy's in the sky." Doctors gave recommendations. Hug him more often, give more love and praise. We do it, my daughter and I. And how many more stories like this are there? Some have been told already, but many are still silent. After the deoccupation of cities and towns, locals told equally horrifying stories. Some were tortured with various forms of torture, wires, electricity, various forms of rape. As of November 2023, the Security Service of Ukraine was investigating over 50,000 cases of war crimes, including abuses against civilians, according to the testimonies of victims and witnesses. Interrogations and torture were conducted by Russian FSB agents, as well as military personnel, Russian National Guard, fighters of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, and members of the Wagner Group. Torture of people in the still occupied part of the Kherson region intensified, especially before Putin's so-called elections. This was reported by Ukrainian MP and former head of the Kherson Regional State Administration, Serhiy Kozyr, on Interfax Ukraine. As of February 24th, about 70% of the territory of the Kherson region is under the occupation of the so-called Russian Federation, with about 30% of the population remaining there. And every day, we read news about intensified filtration measures by the occupier's army and countless other atrocities. The closer the date of Putin's elections, the more cases of human rights violations we documented. This happened every day in the occupied territories. There's less and less coverage of this in the media now, because over the 2 years of occupation, the totalitarian regime significantly tightened control over the circulation of information. I'm sure we only know the tip of the iceberg. And what's really happening, I'm even afraid to think about. I deliberately wrote that these were Putin's elections because we all already know the result. It's just a performance, and unfortunately, our fellow citizens from the occupied territories have become its hostages. I regularly communicate with residents of the Kherson region who managed to escape from this hell. In addition to filtration measures, every day the criminal authorities of the region try to passportize those who manage to avoid Russian documents. Now it's almost impossible to get any service there without a Russian passport. I also constantly hear about threats to confiscate property and cars if they are not re-registered under Russian law. According to the logic of the occupiers, if you don't have their official document, then the property is no longer yours. And the fact that you've lived there all your life means nothing anymore. These are still relatively mild means of influence. Some people are taken to basements, and not all of them come back. Nowadays, it's extremely difficult for Ukrainians to leave the occupation, and without a red book, the chances of survival are too slim. But we believe that all Ukrainian territories will be liberated, and every occupier will be punished for their crimes, and all of this will come back to them 100-fold. The team of TSN.ua expresses sincere condolences to all those who have lost their loved ones in the war. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the armed forces of Ukraine, death to enemies. Take care of yourselves.
We also aim to translate our documentaries into Spanish, French, German, and Italian to reach an even wider audience. But this won't be possible without your help. You can see the impact of our work in our YouTube playlists where these stories are already touching hearts. This is not just Ukraine's fight. Russian terrorism and aggression threaten people everywhere in the world. We are committed to showing the world what life is like for those living under the shadow of war, especially for the children who have lost parents or have been scarred by unimaginable cruelty. Our mission is to help those who continue to suffer and to work toward a future where peace prevails. We are official not-for-profit organization, 501c3 status. Every donation is tax-deductible and directly aids our mission. Rise up, stand with us. Your contribution, whether through a donation or sponsorship, will ensure that the victims of war are not abandoned. Your support will allow us to continue this vital work and bring about change. Please subscribe to our channel, share our videos on social media, and become an advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. Join our interfaith prayer group in Facebook, where we come together to pray for peace, to stop this evil, and to improve lives. Together, we can help end this unjust war. Thank you for your support. The Documentary Ukraine team.